Hello everybody, this is Tip Top MTG here today with another Magic the Gathering video. In today's video, I am covering spoilers for Strixhaven, the ones that came out April 2nd, 2021, and some of the ones that were revealed a little bit later yesterday. So yeah, I'm going to go through all of these spoilers, I'm going to tell you my thoughts on them, explain the card, maybe explain some cool interactions with the card, and we're going to talk about all that. One thing I will note, because there is a big amount of spoilers, because I released my video a little bit early yesterday, because of something I had to do, it means that there are a couple more, so I did not include any commons that I didn't think were interesting. You'll notice there are a few commons sprinkled in, but a lot of them got cut just because they are kind of generic. Either way, let's jump right into this. Starting off, we have this card, which can be translated into Devouring Tentacles. It is a 2-cost green sorcery. Target creature you control deals damage equal to its power to target creature or planeswalker. That's kind of cool. You don't. When the permanent you don't control dies this turn, you gain 2 life. So this is relevant because today is the oh my gosh, why am I calling every guild Prismari? It's the Witherbloom time to shine. So every day this week it has been a different college for Strixhaven, and today is Witherbloom, and each of them kind of has their mechanic and theme. For instance, yesterday it was kind of tokens and +1/+1 counters and creatures dying, that kind of mess. And this one is all about life gain, which we don't really see in Golgari too much, and I'm referring to the color combination there. So it'll be interesting to see what we see with that. On top of that, it's also just a 2-cost removal. Now, I don't think it'll really compete with Ram Through from Ikoria, just because this is sorcery speed, and that has the potential to go face. But the fact that this can target a planeswalker is pretty cool. Next, we have the Biblioplex. It is a land that can tap for colorless, so it doesn't enter the battlefield tapped. And then you can pay 2 and tap it and look at the top card of your library. If it's an instant or sorcery card, you may reveal it and put it into your hand. If you don't, you may put it into your graveyard. Activate only if you have exactly 0 or 7 cards in your hand. Okay, so up until that very last part, I was going to be like, wow, this is going to go in every instant and sorcery deck ever. But I don't necessarily think it will. I mean, if you're running a monocolored deck, I think it's going to be a lot more popular. For instance, I think this could be a really good card in Burn. Just because, think about what Burn's trying to do. Trying to kill you with instants that are kind of going to hit you in the face, and then it runs out of cards. Well, this card is going to let you get those instants and sorceries that are dealing damage, but it also can only be used in decks where you're either going to be staying at a lot of cards or staying at no cards, and so Burn is going to be more likely to be able to get this off. It's also often a monocolored deck, meaning it can maybe afford to lose a couple of its colored lands. So overall, I think this is actually a pretty good card. Next, we have Pestilent Cauldron and Restorative Burst. It is a 3-cost black artifact. Tap, discard a card, create a 1/1 black and green pest creature token with. When this creature dies, you gain 1 life. So you're kind of turning a card in your hand into a 1/1. So while it may look good that you can just tap and create a 1/1, think about turning whatever card you're discarding into a 1/1. Now, this is good if you want that card in your graveyard. Examples of that would be if you want to res something. For instance, in Historic, maybe a Godpharaoh's Gift deck would maybe try and run this to get things into its graveyard faster while also being able to generate value. Then you can pay 1 and tap, and each opponent mills X cards, where X is the amount of life you gain this turn, which might be a little bit based on like the pest you're creating, gaining you life, and other sources of life gain. And then you can pay 4 and tap and exile 4 target cards from a graveyard to draw a card. So honestly, that seems like it'll be the least used ability. Generally, you are probably playing this in a deck that cares about its graveyard. Now, it does say from a graveyard, so you can be targeting your opponents, but paying 4 mana and having to exile stuff is pretty steep. I'm not saying it won't be activated, and it's nice to have on the card, but I don't think people are really throwing this in the deck for that reason. It's going to be for those first 2. Or it's going to be for the sorcery on the back, which I actually haven't read yet. It's a 5-cost green sorcery. Return up to 2 target creature, land, or planeswalker cards from your graveyard to your hand. Each player gains 4 life. Exile it. Alright, so each player gaining 4 life is a little bit weird. However, I guess it's kind of fair based on the price. There are often cards that cost 5 that just return something to your hand, and this lets you get 2 things. However, I will mention that when you're gaining that life, if you have another Pestilent Cauldron out, then you're milling your opponents 4. It's not necessarily the best payoff for it, but it is another source of life gain in Golgari, and so I think it is interesting for that reason. Next, we have this card, which can be translated to Demigoth Woe Eater. It is a 1 green, hybrid, and black for a creature demon, 7/6. At the beginning of your upkeep, sacrifice a creature. So that's why it's a 7/6 for 4, because you have to sack a creature at your upkeep. But there are a lot of decks where that actually could be an upside. Whenever you sacrifice it, each opponent discards a card and you draw a card and gain 2 life. Now, I will mention it does not say sacrifice another creature if you can't sacrifice this. We've seen effects like that in the past where it's saying, yeah, this is a good card and you might be able to deal with the sacrifice trigger, but you are going to lose your whole board before you lose this creature. Versus this card says, you know, oh, you want to get out of this game? Well, then, you know, sack it. For instance, if you were to get this maybe pacified with pacifism, you know, with some other cards you would have to keep sacking your creatures until you run out of them, and you'll eventually be able to sack the creature. But with this, it lets you sacrifice it anytime. So if you ever want to like get out of this shady deal with this creature, so to say, you can do that. And when you do, you're actually going to make your opponent discard a card, you're going to replace it, and you're going to gain 2 life. Honestly, this seems like a really good creature. I mean, even if you do pay 4 for it, and then at your next upkeep you sacrifice it, paying 4 to make your opponent discard a card, you draw a card, and gain 2 life, as well as having a big blocker and potentially a big attacker, seems pretty good. And so I would not be surprised if this sees at least a little bit of play, maybe in more niche decks, but it just seems really, really good. Next, we have this card, which can be translated to Fail. It is a 2-cost black instant, and it says target creature gets -X until end of turn, where X is 7 minus the number of cards in its controller's hand. Now, I don't necessarily know what happens if you, don't have, if your opponent has more than 7, do you give it power and toughness? Maybe. However, it is kind of interesting. You could theoretically, in a deck where you're drawing lots of cards, maybe use this as a big boost. That could be kind of an interesting way to use this card if that's how it works. But yeah, I think this is a little bit of a risky removal spell. Yes, if they're running low on cards, you can kill it, but if they're running low on cards, they're not going to be as big of a threat as someone who's not, and I'd rather just have a more consistent kill spell. Yes, this can take out indestructible things, but that doesn't seem to be a huge issue, and this means that any card that says draw a card can actually save their creature, so you have to kind of have a comfortable enough margin to kill something, or know that they're not going to be able to draw a card. So yeah. Either way, let's move on to the next card. We have this card, which can be translated to Auric Warlock. It's a 4-cost black creature, human warlock, 3/3, and you can tap to search your library for a card, put it into your graveyard, then shuffle. Wouldn't say your library. These are all translated, as you can tell. If an instant or sorcery card was put that way, put a +1/+1 counter on Auric Warlock. Okay, that last part doesn't even matter. This card is insane. Maybe not as much in Historic and Standard, where there isn't as much to do with it, but it still could be good. In older formats, the ability to just every turn for no mana investment, be able to tap and put something into your graveyard seems really good to me. And if this doesn't see play anywhere, it will see play in Commander. Any deck that cares about your graveyard is going to run this card if it's well optimized, just because of how powerful that ability is. People run Entomb, people run lots of things, and obviously you have to untap with this, but it just, the amount of value it potentially offers is so high. Next, we have Overgrown Arch. It's a 2-cost green creature plant wall, 0/4 with Defender, and you can tap to gain 1 life, which is cool in the life gain deck. You can consistently do that. Then you can pay 2 and sacrifice it to learn, which I think is really interesting. It's one of those things where you can put this down, it can be gaining you life and blocking your things, and then eventually when you need to go get that response, you can sacrifice it to get learn. It's not something where it's a spell and you're happening to learn, and so you might as well go get something. It's something where you are learning in response, kind of, and I think that's really interesting. Of course, all the lessons are sorceries, and so it's not necessarily in response, not like you can, learn, grab this card, then do something with it, but it's definitely more reactive than a lot of the other learn cards, and I really like that. Next, we have Tend the Pest. It's a 2-cost black and green instant. As an additional cost to cast this spell, sacrifice a creature. Create X 1/1 black and green pest creature tokens with, whenever this creature dies, you gain 1 life, where X is the sacrificed creature's power. So if you sacrifice a, say, 7-drop that makes you sacrifice creatures at your upkeep to this spell, then you're getting 7 1/1s. This works really well with what I'm alluding to is that creature we saw where it like makes you sack something at your upkeep, and when you sack it, your opponents discard a card and draw a card, and you draw a card, sorry. Yeah, it works really well with that because for a cheaper mana cost, you're getting a high power creature, and then that creature also cares about when it gets sacrificed, which this is sacrificing it. So I actually think that's a fun little interaction, and it was definitely intended. It'll just be interesting to see how that works. I think it's a little gimmicky to really do anything, but the fact that we have Kroxa, if we go into black, red, and green, playing Kroxa, for 2 mana, hold priority, sacrifice it for 6 1/1s, doesn't seem bad either. So maybe we see sacrifice, go sacrifice, like Jund sacrifice, include this card because it does seem pretty good. You're sacrificing a creature and then getting a bunch more creatures to sacrifice. So yeah, I actually think this is pretty good. Next, we have Containment Breach. It's a 3-cost green sorcery lesson. Destroy target artifact or enchantment. If its mana value is 2 or less, create a 1/1 black and green pest creature token with. When it dies, you gain 1 life. Okay, it's a little expensive for artifact or enchantment destruction, especially at sorcery speed, so I don't really think it'll become big in anything. However, remember, this is a lesson. So if you need artifact or enchantment removal, there is now one of those in the lesson slot, and while it is slightly more expensive, you do have the chance of maybe getting a 1/1 out of it. I think that this will be one of those cards that's in a lot of people's lesson deck, just because it is something that you often need but don't want to throw in your deck, and so I think this will see play in sideboards. Next, we have Demigoth Titan. It's a 4-cost 11/10. Yes, you heard me right, 11/10. It's a creature demon, and whenever it attacks or blocks, sacrifice a creature. So this is the second time we're seeing a creature that is overly like power and toughness, but has a downside of making you sack creatures. And I honestly am concerned for this one because it technically can be in mono black. Are we going to see like mono black sacrifice decks become a really big thing? Maybe, I'm not sure. Again, this one works well with Tend the Pest, and if we get enough effects like this, you might actually see like a Tend the Pest, caring about big tough power creature, caring about creatures with big power decks like the ones that would use Tend the Pest. So I think that's actually really interesting, and it's something we don't see a lot. We have a couple other ones. Regal Regisaur, I don't know if that's legal in Standard still, I don't think it is, but in something like Historic, I could see putting a deck like that together where it's a bunch of big creatures that have downsides, but you can do some interesting things with them. Next, we have Honor Troll. It's a 3-cost green creature troll druid, 2/3 with vigilance, and it says if you would gain life, you gain that much life plus 1 instead. Typically a green effect or a white effect, but let's have green take over white spot in the color pie because green is the most useless color and white's the most powerful, right? Either way, it gets +2/+1 as long as you have 25 or more life. This was a white card, I swear, and they just turned it to green. They keep taking green or white and what they're really good at and giving it to other colors while not giving white too much more. Of course, I am really happy with what Lorehold is doing in this set. However, it's not really the white cards that are making me excited. It's more the red ones. So let's hope we get a little bit more. Next, we have Deadly Drought. It's a black and a green for a sorcery. Each player sacrifices a creature or planeswalker. If you sacrifice a permanent this way, you may return another permanent card from your graveyard to your hand. So you can't sacrifice the one that you sacrificed. You can't return the one that you sacrificed. But you can bring something back. What I like is that you have to actually sack something. It's not like, oh, I have an empty board, I get to return it. You only get a card back if you sacrifice something. Next, we have Witherbloom Campus. I just wanted to show off that this is a thing. My opinion is the same as the other ones. It is fine, especially in limited. It's really good, and it just shows off how bad the temples are. Next, we have Harness Infinity. It is 1 black, red, green, instant. Exchange your hand and your graveyard. Exile Harness Infinity. And you can do this at instant speed. So what this means is, say you have a graveyard with like 27 things in it, and your hand has like 1 thing in it. You can cast this spell, it being the 1 thing in your hand, and take all the cards from your graveyard and put them immediately into your hand. Pretty good. It exiles itself so that you can't like loop this, because if you had 2 of them, you could just keep looping it. It is pretty expensive, so you're probably not able to do much with it, so it feels like one of those plays where you are doing it and setting yourself up, but it is an instant, meaning you can do it at your end step right before your turn starts. So I think this will be something that sees play in Commander. It's big and splashy. We've seen, I think, one of these, like a triple of each color in each school, or at least we saw one with the Quandrix. But yeah, this seems really, really good. It doesn't really fit necessarily with what the rest of what Witherbloom is doing. Yes, Witherbloom has some sacrifice themes to it, similar with Silver Quill, but it's mostly going for life gain, and this really doesn't do anything with that. So that's kind of interesting to see. Next, we have Diona, Soul Steeper. It is a black and a green for a legendary creature, Dryad Druid, 1/3, and whenever you gain life, each opponent loses a life. So it is, if you gain 4 life, your opponents aren't losing 4, they're just gaining 1, but that is kind of interesting. It's a veto style of effect, but of course it only does 1 damage per instance of life gain. Then you can pay 1 and sack another creature, and it gets +X/+O until end of turn, where X is the sacrifice creature's power. Yeah, pretty good. I mean, it lets you take your big creatures that maybe were giving you downsides and then sack them for a big boost on Diona. I like that. It seems like that's kind of what they're doing. Each college seems to have 3 kind of things it's doing, and they seem to be caring about sacrificing creatures and planeswalkers, having overly power and toughness creatures with downsides, and then gaining life. And Diona kind of helps with all of that. Next, we have Sejmore Witch. It's a 3-cost black creature, human warlock with menace and ward, pay 3 life, so it makes spells cost 3 more life to kind of target, except it actually is based on countering, but, you can see a previous video for that. Today, I just can't speak. Either way, Magecraft, whenever you cast or copy an instant or sorcery spell, create a 1/1 black and green pest. When it dies, you gain 1 life. Pretty good. I mean, whenever you get an instant or sorcery, you create a creature is pretty cool, especially with cards like Village Rites, which has you sacrifice a creature, you draw 2 cards, and then you also kind of get that creature, not back, but if you're sacrificing a pest to draw a card, or draw 2 cards with Village Rites, you're actually then creating another pest, and so that kind of effect works really well. We have that with... Oh my gosh, why am I not able to think of it? Something Apprentice. Whenever you cast an instant or sorcery, you create an elemental, and, a lot of Rakdos decks do something with that. It's a 2-drop. This is a 3-drop, but it's harder to remove, and it has a death trigger. So I actually think this could see some play, maybe in a historic deck as well. But yeah. Next, we have Plum the Forbidden. It's a 2-cost black instant. As an additional cost to cast the spell, you may sacrifice 1 or more creatures. When you do, copy the spell for each creature you sacked this way. You draw a card and lose a life. So if you have 5 pests, you can, and that previous creature out, for instance, this one works really well with that creature. But say you have 5 pests, you essentially cast this spell, and on its own, by the way, you can play 2 mana and not sacrifice a creature to draw a card and lose a life. Or you can sacrifice 1 creature, and now you get to draw 2 cards and lose 1 life. So the number of creatures you sacrifice, that's how many cards you're drawing, plus 1. You are also losing life. But if you combine this with the previous card, for instance, you can sacrifice 5 creatures, you cast the spell and get 5 copies, and then essentially you would get 6 pests. You'd actually gain a pest from doing this because you get the pest for the first cast and you get it for each copy too. So yeah, that little combination works really well. You can kind of see how the college is coming together. Next, we have Pigment Storm. This one's a common, but I thought it was really interesting. It is a 5-cost red sorcery. It deals 5 damage to target creature. Excess damage is dealt to that creature's controller instead. So we've seen excess damage a little bit in Kaldheim, and a little bit before that in, I think, Zendikar Rising. So you'll notice they are really doing a lot with excess damage, and I think it's really, really interesting to see. I think that as we see more of this effect, it'll really help out burn decks. If burn decks can cast a spell that can deal with their pesky utility creature and then also still hit you for 2 or 3, they are going to really want to do that. So I think it's really interesting, and I really wanted to point out that they are continuing this excess damage mattering thing. Next, we have Callous Blood Mage. It is a 3-cost black creature vampire warlock, 2/1, and when it ETBs, choose 1. Create a 1/1 black and green pest creature token with, when it dies, you gain a life, or you can draw a card and lose a life, or you can exile target player's graveyard. This is actually really, really good, and it reminds me of a Charming Prince, but in black. Charming Prince let you either scry, gain life, or flicker something. This one lets you create a 1/1, draw and lose a life, or exile player's graveyard. Of course, the exiling a player's graveyard card is the most, like, niche one where you're probably not always going to do that, but you can put this in knowing that you're going to get a 1/1 and a 2/1 for 3, which is pretty good in a sacrifice deck, or you can put this in knowing it's going to replace it in your hand. So I think it really depends on what your deck's trying to do, why you'll be putting it in here, but I think that the first two abilities are very universal, and you know, you will often just play this to cycle it, but you also get a 2/1. So I think sacrifice decks may actually really like this card. Next, we have Poet's Quill. It is a 2-cost black artifact equipment. When it ETBs, you learn. So, you know, reveal a lesson card. Pretty good. And then equip creature, it's +1/+1 and has lifelink, and then you can equip it for 2. Seems pretty good in Witherbloom, where you're trying to get them to gain life. It's an interesting equipment. You know, honestly, the amount of equipment we've had has gone up pretty recently. I mean, Zendikar Rising, Kaldheim, and this set have had at least more equipment than, like, previous sets really have. And this one, of course, is a little bit more specific, but the fact that this is a 2-drop that then lets you kind of cantrip is really good. Again, I want you guys to think about the fact that Learn is a cantrip the first 15 times you use it in a game. So, yeah, this is a cantrip, and we really don't see, like, cantrip equipment that often, so pretty cool. Next, we have Black's Vexing Pest. It's a 3-cost green legendary creature pest 3/2, and it says other pests, bats, insects, snakes, and spiders you control have +1/+1. So it's going to boost up all these, like, swampy creatures, and when it dies, you gain 4 life, so if you're going to sack it or something. But yeah, it seems pretty good if you're running any of those tribes. Doesn't, you know, we just got a bunch of changelings. Yeah, I don't really see like a bats deck happening, but it's interesting with Pest, I think most specifically because it's the token that Witherbloom creates. Then we have Search for Blex, which, you know, Blex is a creature. You can pay 4 mana and a sorcery. It's a sorcery, sorry. And look at the top 5 cards of your library. You may put any number of them into your hand and the rest into your graveyard. You lose 3 life for each card you put into your hand this way. So you can pay, you know, 15 life to draw 5 cards. You know, that does seem like a lot, and it's not, you know, nothing, but in something like Commander, this seems really, really good. It reminds me a lot of a Sylvan Library style of effect, and of course, if you don't need that or don't have the life to pull off that effect, you're probably then going to go play Blex. So yeah, I actually think the back is very versatile. If you don't need the creature, you know, go draw something else, and if you do need the creature, well, good, you have it now, so pretty cool. Next, we have Belladrose Witherbloom. It is a 7-cost, so I believe it's the most expensive Elder Dragon. 5 black green legendary creature Elder Dragon 4/4. So it's a 4/4 for 7. But at the beginning of your upkeep, create a 1/1 pest with, you know, when it dies, gain a life. So that's pretty good. You're just getting a creature at each of your upkeeps. And I lied, it's not each of your upkeeps, it's each upkeep. And whenever you pay 10 life, sorry, let me rephrase that. You can pay 10 life to untap all lands you control, activate only once each turn, including on your opponent's turn. So you can, you know, basically get kind of an extra turn of sorts, and it's not going to be that much of a cost. Like, yes, paying 10 life is a lot, but you're getting a pest every upkeep. Each pest is, like, essentially the equivalent to 1 life or more, because if they're blocking a creature and then also giving you a life, this seems pretty good. It is a bit expensive, but then again, it is in green, so it does have that advantage of probably being equivalent to like a 5 cost in a non-ramping color. And so, yeah, it seems pretty good to me. Not necessarily my favorite. I think my favorite is the Prismari Elder Dragon, but this one is not my least favorite either. Next, we have Jadzy, Oracle of Arcavios. It's a legendary creature, human wizard, and it lets you discard a card to return it to its owner's hand. So that's kind of interesting. Maybe you can do some, I don't know, shenanigans with this. Maybe you put it in a deck. I don't know. I think it's really just there because this is an 8-drop, and if you're paying 8 mana, you better be able to save your creature. It has Magecraft, and it says whenever you cast or copy an instant or sorcery spell, reveal the top card of your library. If it's a non-land card, you may cast it by paying 1 rather than paying its mana cost. If it's a land card, put it onto the battlefield. That's an insane effect, but this is an 8-drop. So yeah, that's a pretty crazy effect. You know, cast, shock, get whatever you want off the top of your library. And I just want to say, if it's an instant or sorcery, you trigger Magecraft, so you cast it an instant. I don't care what it is. Shock. You reveal Emergent Ultimatum off the top of your library. Since you cast it, you get to do that. So yeah, if it's an online card, you may cast it by paying 1 rather than its mana cost. So then you cast not Emergent Ultimatum, any of the ultimatums. If it's one that maybe goes and gets you to cast things, for instance, the Sultai Ultimatum, you then go pick a bunch of instants and sorceries, and then for each of those instants and sorceries that you're casting, you're also getting this trigger. This is insane. This can like kind of cascade into more and more stuff. If you're running this in a deck that's pretty much just jadzy and a bunch of instants and sorceries, you can, it'll probably, not always because you do have lands obviously in your deck, it'll probably be the fact where you can kind of just go pay 1 mana, do this effect, and then it's just pay 1 mana spell, 1 mana spell, 1 mana spell. And these are not 1 mana spells. These are like 5, 6, 7 mana spells. So it's pretty crazy. And if it is a land card, you put it onto the battlefield, which just replaced the mana you spent. So this card is crazy if you can get it on the battlefield. And the back is pretty good too. Journey to the Oracle. It's a 4-cost green sorcery. You may put any number of land cards from your hand onto the battlefield. Then if you control 8 or more lands, you may discard a card. If you do, return Journey to the Oracle to its owner's hand. Which means you can, say, have this in your hand and 5 other lands, pay 4, and just drop 5 lands into play to maybe help you go get jadzy. But you're like, well, you just cast it. Well, since now you have more than 8 lands, which is enough to cast jadzy, it returns itself to your hand so you can cast it. So it's one of those ones very similar to like Alrund from Kaldheim, where the backside is meant to help you get to the front side, and it can kind of come back to your hand. So you can kind of boomerang the spell. You shoot it as Journey of the Oracle, it comes back as jadzy. However, you can also just recast Journey to the Oracle. So if you have the ability to draw a bunch of lands, put a bunch of lands into your hand, this could be really, really good, especially with something like Nylea's Intervention from Theros, where you can get a ton of instants or a ton of lands, but you can't put them in the battlefield. You combine that with this, you get something interesting. Yeah, I think this is a really, really powerful card. I think it'll definitely be a Commander and Brawl, not staple, but played card. Next, we have Tempted by the Auric. It is 1 blue for a sorcery. For each opponent, gain control of up to 1 target creature or planeswalker that player controls with mana value 3 or less. In, standard, it's fine. 4 mana, gain control of something with mana value 3 or less. In Commander, this seems really good. You're getting 3 things for 4 mana. So I really just think it depends on how you're playing this card, whether it's good or not. Next, we have a Shadowwinglaurette. It's a white, I was about to say a mystic. A white, a hybrid, and a black for a creature, human warlock, 2/2 with flying, and whenever another creature you control with flying dies, put a counter on target creature you control. Okay, the whole, Silver Quill college just seems so all over the place. It's like, we want counters, we want to kill things, we want tokens. It's like, what do you want? Just pick something. Next, we have Retriever Phoenix. It's a 4-cost red Phoenix, 2/2 with flying and haste, and when it enters the battlefield, if you cast it, learn. And if it's in your graveyard, if you would learn, you may instead return it to the battlefield, which, by the way, does not trigger the learn, because you have to cast to do that. So instead of learning, you can return it. I think that's pretty cool. If you run out of things you want to go grab, you can essentially turn any card that learns into returning this from your graveyard to the battlefield. Honestly, surprised this isn't necessarily legendary. It seems like something they would do that with, but Phoenixes are always kind of interesting in how they work. Next, we have Gnarled Professor. It's kind of boring, but it's a 4-cost green creature, Treefolk Druid, so it's a 5/4 for 4 with Trample, which is already really good stats. And then whenever DTBs learn, so it's a cantripped 4-cost 5/4 with Trample. I think that's all I have to say. Seems like it's something that might see play in a mono green deck. Next, we have Nevinda, Student's Advocate. It's a 3-cost white legendary creature, Bird Advisor, 2/3 with flying. Pay 0. You may cast target instant or sorcery card from your graveyard this turn. If that spell doesn't target a creature you control, it costs 8 more to cast. If the spell would be put into your graveyard this turn, exile it instead. Activate only once each turn. So you essentially take something from your graveyard, you can cast it on one of your creatures, you are still paying the mana cost for it, and you still have to do it at the right time. So it's not like you can just take a sorcery and do it at instant speed, but say you have a sorcery, 2-drop, it, gives the creature +2/+2, you can pay 0 mana and then pay the 2 mana for the spell and cast it on your creature. If you want to cast something on the enemy creature, for instance a removal spell, it costs 8 more. So let's say you have a 1-cost removal spell, and you want to cast it from your graveyard, you are paying 9 mana to do so. And you're like, why did they even let you do that? First off, it's in mono white. You're never going to have 9 mana. But second, it's there just, as an option. If you get really late in the game, it kind of unlocks new options for this card. I think it's interesting. I don't know how amazing it is, especially because you can only do it once each turn, and you still have to pay the mana cost and all that. But it definitely is a way for white to kind of gain some card advantage if you do something that, for instance, draws you cards. It's kind of like a mini feather, which is kind of funny because it's a bird. Next, we have Mila and Luca. So this is the final planeswalker that we know of. Mila is a crafty companion. It's a 3-cost legendary creature fox 2/3. So 2/3 for 3, not awful. Whenever an opponent tanks one or more planeswalkers you control, put a loyalty counter on each planeswalker you control. That is pretty good. In a planeswalker deck, this is the second card in the set that is a planeswalker, and I know Mila isn't, but it's on the side of a planeswalker that cares about boosting up other planeswalkers. And so I think that's really, really interesting that both Kazmina and Luca are over here saying, let's boost up other planeswalkers. Either way, whenever a permanent you control becomes the target of a spell or ability an opponent controls, draw a card. Alright, there you go. There's your white card draw. At its best, essentially, or at its worst, I should say, this is 3 mana, and it'll, cycle itself. If you play this, and someone removes it, well, you just drew a card. So that's really awesome. But remember, this is also ability. This is just really, really good, and if your opponents can't deal with Mila, then they're going to have a really hard time dealing with you, because as they remove your stuff, you're getting to replace it. And then we have Luca, Wayward Bonder. It's a 6-cost red legendary planeswalker Luca, 5 loyalty. You can +1 him and discard a card. If you do, you draw a card. If a creature card was discarded this way, draw 2 cards instead. Luke obviously cares about creatures coming from the plane of Ikoria. He has a -2. Return target creature card from your graveyard to the battlefield. It gains haste. Exile it at the beginning of your next end step. And then -7, you get an emblem with, whenever a creature enters the battlefield under your control, it deals damage equal to its power to any target. Alright, so none of these scream to me as super busted. I mean, the -2 is probably the best ability here. It's very similar to his other card where he's cheating things into play that he probably shouldn't. This one you have to have in your hand and you only get to keep for 1 turn. I really like the fact that early in the game you might play Mila, but then if you pull it a little later, Luca might be kind of useful for you. I really like the design of this. Next, we have Blot Out the Sky. It's X, white, and a black for a sorcery. Create X tapped 2/1 white and black inkling creature tokens with flying. If X is 6 or more, destroy all non-creature, non-land permanents. So it's going to destroy artifacts, enchantments, planeswalkers. Very, very interesting to me. We don't see many everything but creature board wipes, especially ones that create a bunch of 2/1s along the way. Next, we have Killen Ink Duelist, white and a black for a legendary creature, Human Warlock, 2/2, lifelink and menace. Spells you cast that target a creature cost 2 less to cast. We often see things cost more to cast, but we often don't see making your spells cost less to cast if they're targeting, and I think it makes a lot of sense for a duelist to kind of have that ability. So I think it's really cool. Next, we have Humiliate. It's a 2-cost silver quill sorcery. Target opponent reveals their hand. You choose a non-land card from it. That player discards it. Put a counter on something. Pretty good. This reminds me a lot of Thought Erasure, which was a 2-cost, Demir sorcery. Target opponent reveals their hand. You choose a non-land card from it. They discard it, and then you surveilled. This puts a counter on a creature, which I think is just inherently worse. But I do think this card will see play. Next, we have a Selfless Glyph Weaver, 3-cost, white creature, human cleric, 2/3. You can exile it, and creatures you control gain indestructible until end of turn. So you can't loop it like the dog from M21 or Alstead of Life's Bounty, but it does not require mana to activate or a tap ability, so that's pretty cool. And then Deadly Vanity is the other side, which is kind of the opposite. It's an 8-cost black sorcery. Choose a creature or planeswalker, then destroy all others. So you keep your biggest thing and destroy the rest. Very powerful. Not asymmetrical, but it is definitely not affecting you as much as it's affecting your opponent. And because of that, that's why it's such an expensive one. Now, I do want to say black has been getting a lot more just good old-fashioned board wipes recently, and I find it to be very interesting. That used to be a white thing. White was one of the creatures that got, or one of the colors that really got destroy all creatures, and black got minus ability-based board wipes, but this is the second set in a row where we're seeing just a destroy all other creatures or destroy all creatures. Last set with Kaldheim, we got Blood on the Snow, and it'll be interesting to see if they continue removing things that white does uniquely. Next, we have Silver Quill Campus. Again, I just want to show off that this is in the set. And that is it for this video. If you guys enjoyed, hit that like button. This is actually the last day of spoilers for Strixhaven. Monday there will be Commander spoilers, and if there is a significant amount of spoilers that are interesting, I will do another video over the weekend covering the ones that get released later today. Either way, if you enjoyed, hit that like button, subscribe. I will see you in the next one. Bye.